Is masturbation a sin? This is the number one question I receive in purity ministry. And it's the one that should have the easiest answer, right? After all, it's simply a yes or no question. Well, sometimes what appears simple might have a few layers of complexity to it. This is one issue which I believe has a few layers. First, what is masturbation? Masturbation is simply sexual self-stimulation. And from different vantage points, even this definition can be seen differently. For example, from a recovering adult sex addict's viewpoint, masturbation comprises an enormous part of his acting out history, most of which could be clearly seen as outside of God's moral boundaries for sexuality. Therefore, the physical act of masturbation itself can be deemed sinful. However, to an 11-year-old boy who just experienced an erection and touched himself, masturbation might not have attached to it all the immoral connotations that the recovering sex addict has, especially if this boy has no sexual history and is completely ignorant of porn, fantasy, or other clearly immoral behaviors. That being said, I believe that ultimately masturbation is not God's best for us when it comes to how we manage our sexuality. So whether or not masturbation in and of itself is a sin, I want to show that I believe it is less than what God intended for our sexualities. Adam and Eve were created purposely by God as sexual beings. And when God brought Eve to Adam after forming her from Adam's rib, He blessed them and commanded them to be fruitful and multiply. I love to remind people that the first command given to human beings was to have sex. But there are some important elements to note regarding this union. First, sex was designed to be between one man and one woman. This was not an act to be committed with an animal or with multiple partners or with the same gender. Second, sex was reserved for expression within marriage. From the very beginning, sex was made for relationship. Therefore, masturbation doesn't fit with that original intent since it is self-sex. Strike one for masturbation being a viable use of one's sexuality. Masturbation is a building block behavior of sexual addiction, and in that addictive development, it almost always is associated with porn or some other lustful mindset. This begins to form strong bonds between immoral thoughts and the act of masturbation. The further one travels down the addictive pathway, the more pronounced the connection between sin and masturbation. A type of classical conditioning occurs to one's sexuality, in which the lustfulness of sinful sexual thoughts is the primary means by which an individual can become physically aroused. No porn, fantasy, or lust, no arousal. This is not God's design. God would never expect that we should travel a sinful pattern to achieve sexual arousal. That is contrary to who He is on so many levels. Therefore, if one has created such a link between masturbation and lust, you can be sure masturbation is not right. Strike two. Finally, because masturbation is an isolated act, it pulls one away from the type of intimacy God designed for marriage. This is true whether a person is married or single. For the married person, this is obvious. If a husband is engaging in masturbation, he certainly isn't connecting on any level, physically or emotionally, with his wife. But even for the single person, masturbation is still drawing them away from healthy relationships and helping them develop thought patterns of isolation, selfishness, and lust. Strike three for masturbation. So is masturbation a sin? I'm not sure, but I do know it is most often connected to sin. At the very least, masturbation is not God's best, nor is it part of His original design for your sexuality. My advice? Just say no.